for being here. My name is Jeanne Ciravolo. I am a figurative painter. This work that I do is based on, it honors the narratives of my female relatives. These are stories that I heard as a child, or things that I was witnessing or part of in family life, which are complex. And so my work is really based on stories of women, and they're often about loss, but resilience as well. So I was trained traditionally as a portrait painter and spent decades painting portraits, very traditional oil portraits. But at a certain point, I felt like I really needed to talk about something that was meaningful to me. So I began working with experimental drawing, trying to get away from the figure, trying to get away from my hand, right? So I can draw, and it comes too easy. And so trying to find a way to kind of unlearn, make something that was raw. So I started with collage. So I have a separate practice of creating paper, painted paper, where I just create this paper and I have a collection, and they're all different colors and textures and marks on them. And so I can kind of focus on this practice and love of color and texture. And so I have a collection of paper. So what my practice is turned out to be is a combination of drawing, painting, and collage, and printing, printmaking to a certain degree, very rudimentary. Block prints. I create little carved stamps, and I print them sometimes into the work. So the piece you're looking at here what I do is I start with a line drawing. So I do come up with some kind of idea of a figure or two figures, and I draw. I draw with charcoal, and I draw and redraw, and often, kind of the mistakes remain, the drawing and the redrawing. And so once I've got kind of a drawn image on, then I start to look through my collection of papers, and I find one that I just think is really interesting for some reason and start putting paper up. And what I like about the process is that I've done a lot of reading about writers, and one thing that I've read again and again is that writers will start and they'll create kind of the bare bones of a character or some kind of a situation, and then begin to write. And as the writing progresses, that the writing kind of takes on a life of its own, or the characters do what they're meant to do. They're created, but then they do their own thing. And as a writer, you're kind of on a ride. And so I do the same thing with my drawing, because I am trying not to impose my own ideas too much upon it. That was my way of making before, which is kind of foreign to me now. So I put the paper up, and sometimes something surprising will happen, like some kind of a mood will come forth, a certain kind of narrative will emerge. I also work with, again, my work is all about women's stories and experiences. Mostly listening to my grandmother talk about family stories. I restrain myself in certain ways to work within the domestic sphere. So I use, for surfaces, sometimes I will use kitchen towels. My grandmother was a seamstress who did not teach me how to sew for a reason. So I'm drawing with thread and very inexpertly stitching on these kitchen towels or doilies that my grandmother embroidered, that she crocheted. And what I do is I like that these kitchen towels and objects, they come to me with stains, they come with a pattern, and that I can kind of become transported into this weird little space and find a narrative in it. but I'm really keeping myself to only use materials that are domestic. So thread, in this one you can see I have, it's what onions come in or something, these produce bags. Some of them are mesh and some of them are net. And so I can use those, I'm allowed to use those, right? So I'm trying to keep myself pretty strictly to the collage, the sewing, and domestic materials. Can you change, please? So this one had a stain. You can see it's like somebody put a cup down or a glass down, and it became a brown stain. And you can see, my stitching, which I'm not going to learn to embroider, but I'm just trying to get an image on the object. This one actually became more of a painting because I have some of the painted paper on the left side, and then also I kind of call them paint scabs, but they're, when you clean your palette, you get these lovely little kind of scabs of paint. And I've actually, at the Residency, I'm starting to make them. They're almost like little paintings. I'm kind of composing them, and they're becoming something that I'm interested in as kind of the detritus of making work. So again, like, I'm working within this idea of resistance, of making do with what you have, which is actually something that I was raised with, from my grandparents, my mother, and so I'm trying to keep myself within a certain range of materials and to kind of enjoy that resistance of making do with what you have. So, next slide, please. This is a dish rag that actually, what I really like about some of these domestic textiles is the labor that is inside them. A previous Residency I went to, the women who were working in the kitchen were so nice. I was chatting with them, and they were throwing away these horribly disgusting, like, old dish towels. I'm like, oh, please let me have them. They're so beautiful. So like, I ran away with them. I was so excited, and I still have them. I haven't used them yet because they're so precious. They have like all the years of, like, or whatever, months of like cleaning and cooking, and so the labor inside these objects is important to me also, again, as like a child in the kitchen, when my grandmother was always in the kitchen cooking and caring for people by making food. So in this one you can see I carved a little stamp, and you're going to see it in another painting coming up. It's from a Masaccio painting, which is in the 1400s. There's this painting, it's the expulsion of Adam and Eve, and it's a very interesting, like, art history comes to my mind when I'm making work because I'm very versed in art history as a traditional painter. And this idea during the pandemic, I was thinking a lot about loss and thinking about this painting, how, Adam is, buried his face in his hands, and Eve is just like, she's just like complaining, she's complaining, she's crying out. And so I just made a little stamp of this, and I used it in this piece, which also has a pressed flower and a doily that my grandmother had crocheted. So I make these are rather large. I'm interested in the monumental figure, in the monumental female figure as being powerful, but also, again, this was made like during the pandemic, but we were coming out of it. But this idea of a struggle, this idea of drawing the figure, and then kind of finding the narrative through the paper. And what I'm making these on is, again, like Lauren, I'm interested in these very rough fabrics. These are, drop cloths from Home Depot, they're canvas. And like the domestic textiles, I'm interested in what they hold. The actual drop cloth, you hold it up and it's irregular, it's got a lot of folds and creases in it. And a lot of my beginning of these kinds of works is just looking at those wrinkles and finding a way for the figure to fit inside. And that some of these I enhance the folds because they actually become important to the narrative. So this one, I don't know, it might be hard to see, but there was a big crease right down the middle, and I was able to kind of fit her inside those folds. And again, it's like trying to work within a framework. And so it's really actually shows a lot of dimensionality to it because I preserved the folds and then tried to figure out how she could fit within the folds and the spaces. This one also, I'm using, again, the mesh from the kitchen, the produce bags. This one, I used rice paper over the face on the left. So there was, I made a block print, and then this rice paper kind of made the space where I could create a moment where the two people were having an encounter. Again, this is a paper doily. I sew things on, I tear things off, I collage paper on, I tear it off. So there's a lot of back and forth in trying to find these figures, which often kind of are like apparitions. I'm really trying to figure out how I can allow something to exist in the canvas, right? And then I'm papering over, I'm editing, papering over, what can I peel away, what can I allow to remain? So it's a very fluid process. It's very different from the oil painting. Like, you sketch, you do your 3 colors, and then you add the oil paint, and it's very linear. So this is a detail of that work, again, just showing the drawing existing with the painting and the collage. So it's a very, again, back and forth kind of process.
Could you go back to the previous slide for just a sec?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's, yeah. So next slide, please. This one is called Expulsion. So in the pandemic, again, I was thinking a lot about loss, and I was drawing this monumental female figure, and I'm having her striding, and then of course, how did this happen? I don't know, she ends up striding into darkness, right? Because that's where I was in my mind, but she's looking over her shoulder at where she's been, and I was just really thinking of like streaming trails of glory. I don't know if, is that like Wordsworth or something? Like we're born like streaming trails of glory. But there's all this darkness around us. And as I was working on this figure, this is where the Eve came in. So this is earlier than the little dish rag that you saw. And then I decided, it came to my mind, I carved the stamp, and then I just put it in there as like kind of this chorus of complaint, like a bunch of like women just really complaining, and trying to hold on to the good, but being kind of in between bad and bad. So that's kind of what that one's about. It also has some birch bark in it. So again, thinking this figure became an Eve-like figure for me. And all of these tend to be somewhat like self-portraits. They don't look like me, but they end up being really about like what I'm thinking about. Yeah, so this is a close-up, just showing, this is the birch bark, and I'm a gardener, so I'm very interested in plants. So sometimes natural materials just come in because I love them. And again, the charcoal drawing, and the collage, and the printing. And then you can see on the far left, that's the Masaccio painting that I was thinking about. Okay, next slide. And this is the last slide. So this is a really large piece. I'm struggling to really create these images of women that have power, right? And that, so these 2 female figures, it's very, very large. I had to actually like climb a little ladder up and down to make it. And what I wanted to create these women that were like watchful, and they were together, these 2 women. It turned out to kind of be me and my sister in a way, and I didn't realize it at the time. But again, as I'm working, images from art history come to mind. And when I was an undergraduate taking art history class, there was this painting, the Oath of the Horatii by Jacques-Louis David, in which the men, it's a story from Roman times, but it's neoclassical French painting. These men have swords, they're very rigid, they're powerful. And then in the corner are the women, And the art historian who was teaching the course, who was a woman, said, oh, and look at the women in the corner, all sinuous lines, they're like weeping, they're like, they have no power. And I just remember that. So again, a lot of what I'm making is about art history, it's about my stories, my family stories. So in this work, it's very small, but I made a sketch of the weeping women, right? And it's kind of, again, like a text. It's like a visual text, this art historical text that's kind of like at their feet, but again, present but not dominating, right? Because this is the answer to that. So that's what I have for you. Thanks. Do we have time for questions? Okay. If you have any questions.
If I may say something, your either your first or your second piece that you showed us reminded me of a display, an exhibit that was out at the Britain last summer, in which the artist had taken like Pendleton blankets or some sort, really colorful background, and then painted and stitched, and you could go, and when you went in there, you were like, oh, there's Custer, or
Right.
It was all Native American themed,
Sure.
and it was just really interesting to see that both like in an artistic view of however you look at art, right? But then also pick out the pictures, the faces, and that's what I see in your art, and that's really fun for me. I just wanted to share that. It's fun to see your art and like your sister or you or two women or however, but it's fun to like look at it and see the colors and the shapes and all of those things, and then see the people.
Right. So the figures for me are kind of like they're becoming and they're unbecoming, right?
Yes.
They're kind of emerging, but then I'm also like taking it back. And then
Exactly.
what I end up with is like, okay, well that's what it is, but I don't really know what it is until I go through the whole process of like covering it up, uncovering it,
Yes.
that kind of thing.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks.
You didn't show any pictures of your early portrait painting,
Right.
the classical traditional, whatever. But I'm just, and I stereotype it, I have in my head, that's what it was. And I just think about the contrast from where you were working to where you are now. It's extraordinary.
Oh, thanks.
We've really pushed and broken barriers, and it's become personal and very universal, in terms of accessing all the different things that you're talking about and working with.
Yeah, thank you. I think I was working today on a piece, and even though I'm really making paintings and drawings, and their women are the characters, often it's about my sons, but they're just like they're women. I mean, I'm like, it really is more universal, but I want to depict women because they need to be seen and they need to be big. And thank you. Yeah, it took me going to graduate school to get there. Honestly, I tried and tried to break away from that process, but 20 years of doing traditional portrait painting is very stultifying in a way. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
That was a brave step forward.
Yeah, well, I just got to a point where I thought, well, I just don't want to end my life doing this. Like, I know how to do it. It's like really boring. And so I have a lot of, look, I really wanted to learn how to paint that way. All I cared about, and that's why I studied art history, like all I wanted to do was just make something look real. And, but then I did it, and now I'm not doing that. But thank you for your attention.